with Alan Juddy, and this is another episode of Seed Dating, the podcast where you get to meet one of Agricom's forage products, learn about its attributes, and match it to your own farm system. And here to help nurture this new blossoming relationship is our very own forage relationship expert, Alistair Moorhead. Hi, Al. And who are we going to meet today?
Well, Juddy, today we're going to meet Revel, tetraploid annual ryegrass, a fast establishing annual to boost your winter production.
You mean rev it up with Revel, Al?
That's the one, Juddy, you petrol head.
Well, before we reveal Revel, can you give me a bit of context around what annual ryegrasses are and how they differ?
Oh, this is a huge category from a world perspective. Annual ryegrasses fit into every landscape that you can imagine because it is a short season grass that doesn't need to persist, and therefore it can go into subtropical, can go into continental climates. It's a huge application in the world. But when it comes to our temperate environment, we definitely have consolidated around predominantly tetraploid annual ryegrasses. We definitely have looked at its roles predominantly as intercropping between cropping systems, short punches of feed, sow in middle of autumn, sometimes even approaching the middle to late autumn, fast feed through the winter and or setting up for early silage before they are sprayed out to fit into another rotation.
So they're kind of they fill a gap, and they can produce quite a lot of feed in a short period of time.
Absolutely. In a New Zealand context, we've got probably two primary lengths, probably three primary lengths of time that are relevant from a short catch crop of annual ryegrass or ryegrass. And that's the earlier dropout stuff, which is where we're taking it out to plant in maize and or summer brassicas, which is typically our middle month of spring. We're looking to sow, and therefore you're probably needing to take your grass out final silage quite early in spring. And then we have another group of crops that don't go until the end of spring and even the first month of summer. And therefore we can actually have a longer, more extended outcome from your choice of tetraploid annual in that sort of window of time. So the other two sort of drivers at that end, and there's a few drivers of the performance of annual ryegrass from their sowing dates, but you tend to find they're quite either cropping limited, i.e. you don't get the opportunity to sow them until your maize is finished, using maize as an example, or you're finishing a summer crop, or you're just wanting to clean up weeds before your next crop pasture rotation, and you want a short fix before you go into a renovation that you might want to be able to spray out hard to kill weeds.
And I guess that's why the attribute of being a fast starter, i.e. in the ground and out of the ground quickly and to your first grazing fast, is a really important attribute.
That's right. I don't really want to rain on the category, but they're not the only ones that can go fast from the start. Like the Italian ryegrass category in New Zealand is every bit as productive as the annual ryegrass category. So you've got a combined set of traits for the annual ryegrass category, and that's wrapped up in a price point. So it is also a cheaper form of sowing for short-term dry matter production. If you wanted to have some of the higher yielding or highest yielding in the short term, some of those are still Italians in the New Zealand context. They're not annuals, but the point is it's wrapping it up in a whole lot of positive traits for an annual, which is also wrapped up in a price point, which is associated with seed production potential as well as agronomic performance.
Yeah, so you make a good point in terms of when you know it's only for a year.
Or not a year,
or
6 months.
6 months.
8 months.
In a gap.
Yeah.
These annual types are probably better value for money.
Well, they need to be better value for money. Otherwise, there are actually slightly better performers in the case of some of our highest performing Italians. And even one or two of our highest performing hybrid ryegrasses can compete with them in 6 months, but they are much more expensive for the time they're in the ground.
Because they have the ability to go through
the value,
summer.
The true value of the seed is because they go for longer and excel at those moments.
Is this category dominated by tetraploids, or does Plody have a big role to play in this category?
It does. You tend to find bigger plants, bigger seed, better colour. There's a lot of traits associated with the tetraploidy characteristic with double the chromosomes, creating a dark green, glossy-leafed, large plant. There's a lot of satisfaction in sowing a tetraploid annual. The diploid category is really small. There's only ever been a few varieties in the diploid annual category, and technically they do get outshone by the tetraploids in visual and, to be fair, in performance on average. It takes a lot to get a diploid up to the standard of some of our tetraploid annuals.
And so quite a versatile grass. You could graze this or silage it.
Oh, absolutely. And I suppose that's going to be a good lead on into Revel, but predominantly depending on how winter active your winter is, defines how many times you can use it in the winter. So there are some regions of New Zealand where it's mild enough in winter to get your sowing in early and grows multiple times through the wet winter, for example. There's others where it's actually cooler, the seed's gone in later, and the reality is you probably only get one hit in winter and one hit in spring as a silage, for example. So it really depends on your sowing date and how warm your winter is to exactly what you're going to experience.
And of course, quality throughout, because we're not actually dealing with seed.
That's right. And it's probably not as defining a trait for selection. But a couple of the things that are really defining traits is that you don't want rust. If you leave annual ryegrass to higher covers, particularly in spring, you don't want rust. And some tip diseases and leaf diseases that can kick in under cold conditions. If I was to look at a trait that I value most in the tetraploid annual world, and again, it relates to discussing Revel when we get onto it, is that the winter wear and wet conditions for an upright big tetraploid hybrid is quite a big deal. So some of the subtle traits of how you recover from winter grazing is a trait I value.
And so I guess ask you again in terms of Revel, the product, what do you think the characteristic that makes it stand out the most in terms of its agronomy?
Well, this has been a really hard category to improve. The big seeded plants that have strong vigor out of the ground, they all grow really well. And you tend to find that many of the big differences of this category tend to occur in springtime. And you tend to see that they go through big yielding phases either in the middle of spring or near the end of spring. And that's probably defines some of their true total yield traits. What I've valued about Revel is that it's not the best at any one point of time, but every time it's performing and amongst other types at a high level. So it's never beaten by the same variety in every cut. There's always a different variety cycling above it. And therefore, when you add it up, it adds up quite high. It adds up really high. So I would describe it as a product that can tolerate a range of harvest conditions and bounce every time.
Yeah.
Probably the real trait of strength of Revel.
Consistency.
Yep, from the start, right out of the ground, first grazing, first harvest, bounce back. And the consistency of which it does that each time is really high. And that's under a whole range of environmental conditions. That probably, and for a tetraploid, it's, one of the things is there's bigger and broader and darker tetraploids. This has actually got a little bit of density for it. It's all relative. These are quite broad plants, but it's got a little bit more density. If you see a broad type and this side by side, you would see a difference. And I think that reflects this ability to bounce back under those winter grazings. So that's probably one of the highlight traits for me, consistency.
Cool. Well, ding, ding. That's brilliant. Now it sounds to me like it's a 0 to grazing in real quick time. So today I'm going to identify as a maize grower in the Waikato, and I'm looking for a annual to go in after my maize to really get out of the ground quickly and produce a lot of feed. So I'm going to be swiping right. You've been listening to another episode of Seed Dating with Al and Juddy. Hope you can catch another episode real soon.